Kentucky lobbyists take in $5.6 million. Why Trump's palace intrigue matters for policy. Climate change and common sense politics. And Governor Matt Bevin talks taxes.
Welcome to the Kentucky Gazette Podcast, Episode 111, the Commonwealth's podcast on state government, politics, and public affairs.
I'm Laura Cullen-Glasscock, editor and publisher of the Kentucky Gazette.
And I'm Leo Haggerty. Let's kick things off this week with a regular feature of the print version of the Gazette. And you've told me before this is one of readers' most popular editions, Kentucky Lobbyist Salaries from this past legislative session.
That's right. The lobbyists in Kentucky made $5.6 million this year in 3 months.
Cha-ching.
As a group. Yes, absolutely. Lobbyists have to report their compensation they receive from their employers with the Kentucky Legislative Ethics Commission. And so that's where that dollar amount comes from. And that's just on the legislative side, of course. The top earner was Bob Babbage, who reported, I think, $220,000 for the 3-month session. So that's pretty sweet for Bob.
Not bad for 3 months' work. Hey, Bob,
Right.
how about lunch sometime on you?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I'll go.
But, people should also understand there's different types of lobbyists. This is just legislative lobbyists.
That's right. The lobbyists work the executive side as well, and those lobbyists have to register with the Executive Branch Ethics Commission. And on that side, they don't have to report their income, which is there have been some critics of that policy, but it takes the House and Senate to change that rule. It has to go into it has to be made into a law to require the lobbyists to do so.
And then there's also federal lobbyists.
Yes.
And that's a completely different kettle of worms. So all we're really talking about here,
this is just the State General Assembly.
But some of these folks on these lists are legislative lobbyists, executive branch lobbyists, and federal lobbyists.
That's right, Leo. So this is just for legislative lobbying, the Kentucky General Assembly from January 1st to March 31st. The other thing, too, is a lot of people don't know this, but there are actually more executive branch lobbyists, more people registered to lobby the executive branch in Kentucky than the legislative branch.
I didn't know that.
And if you think about it, it makes sense, though, because once the legislature appropriates the money, the executive branch spends it. And so a lot of companies and people have lobbyists in place who try to get contracts and want to do that government work.
And the other thing that if somebody does, and I mean this takes up a big chunk of the issue this time. So I mean, people who go through and drill down, you'll find that a lot of these folks made little or no money, and they only have like one client. So I mean, theoretically you could register as a lobbyist and lobby on behalf of the Kentucky Gazette.
Sure.
So not everybody this is their job. It's just
that's
part
right.
of a bigger job.
That's right. There's two different types of lobbyists in general. There's contract lobbyists and then association or company lobbyists. So, for example, Bob Babbage, Sean Cutter, Chris Nolan over at MML&K Government Solutions, they are contract lobbyists. And that's, if you think about it like a lawyer hangs out a shingle and has different clients, that's how they are. They're lobbyists who have a lot of different clients, and they do work on behalf of those clients on a contract basis. But then you might have an association or a company lobbyist like Dave Adkison at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. He's the CEO of the chamber, but part of his time is spent lobbying, and so the time that is spent lobbying has to be reported to the Ethics Commission.
And that would relate more to go back to your lawyer analogy, in-house counsel.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and then companies, same thing. So Ashland has an in-house lobbyist, I think, still. Some
several,
of those
and nonprofits very often
Exactly.
will, and things like that. So,
Sure.
If you are a listener and not a subscriber, this might be the time to subscribe if you want to find out how much money everybody's making.
That's right, and we list all the clients, too, so you know who's paying who.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so also on page 1 under notes and quotes, there is a piece where Governor Matt Bevin has purchased a new house, and he's also stirred up some controversy around that.
That's right. The Courier-Journal broke that story about Governor Bevin buying a house apparently for less than the market value, and the home belonged to a person who the governor appointed to one of the retirement pension boards. And so Tom Loftus, the reporter at the Courier-Journal, was trying to figure out how that worked and what's going on with that. And the governor has criticized Tom Loftus. And in fact, on WHAS radio, an interview with Terry Miners, the governor called Tom Loftus pathetic and basically was shooting the messenger, it appears. Well, in my view, he's shooting the messenger, which is becoming a tactic with politicians these days. We're seeing it from the Trump administration.
And Ron Bryant, when he was a guest on the podcast, talked about the fact that there is a long, storied history in American politics that if an elected official or a candidate doesn't like the story, they attack the person telling the story.
You shoot the messenger.
It's not something new.
It's not. Yeah. It's not at all. But what was interesting is, so the governor had his interview with Terry Miners on WHAS radio, and this story that we're talking about right now came out of that, bubbled up to the top. But the governor said some other things in there that kind of got lost, or maybe I just didn't see it. But the governor talked about pensions and the need for pension reform in Kentucky still, and tax reform. And he did say quite clearly that pensions are on the line in Kentucky. And what we did, or what in the Gazette, is we went ahead and transcribed that radio interview, and we've printed it. And it's kind of lengthy, but it's very interesting. And one thing the governor says is, and this is a quote, "The folks in KERS in particular will stop having their checks first. So we have retirees who worked, did what they were expected to do, were promised things, and the money will literally not be there if we don't have significant tax and pension reform." And so what the governor is saying is that this is a very serious crisis, and he is pointing out who will lose if the pension system is not reformed soon. And he even mentioned in his interview, in a couple of months, something needs to be done.
Well, and I know at least that Senator Damon Thayer from Scott County has been one of the folks in the legislature who's been calling on the governor to take more of a leadership role in selling the need and what his plan is. So this may be an early first step to that sales job.
Sure, could be. And see, the KERS system is different. It's a separate fund than the teachers' retirement or even the legislators and judicial retirement funds. So it's the largest of all the pension funds in the state, and that's why it's obviously in because it covers more people, right. It has more to lose.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. So let's move on. We've got on page 3, Linda Feldman, who is a writer for the Christian Science Monitor, has an article about what the policy implications might be caused, what it might be causing from the palace intrigue, as she calls it, in the Trump White House. So what's going on there?
Well, it's interesting. President Trump has shifted some of his staff. Steve Bannon has been was removed from the
National Security Council.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And some other people have shifted around too. And what her point is that it looks like it's softening the tone a little bit, and that could imply policy shifts if the president is listening to different people now.
Well, and if you look at his campaign, as they ran into problems, there always seemed to be a constant change in the cast of characters.
That's true.
And the White House doesn't seem to be much different.
No, not yet.
Okay. So regular contributor Ron Bryant, who we were talking about earlier, who, as I mentioned, was a guest on episode 108, has his history column, and this time looks at Kentucky's reluctance to enter World War I.
That's right. He talked about, it's a really interesting column, as they all are, but this one he discussed the home front, so to speak. World War I actually was good for Kentucky farmers, and he talks a little bit about the agriculture and the state not wanting to send soldiers to the front, but eventually complying and realizing that it was for the national good.
And that kind of ties into a book review that he's got later
That's right.
as well. So
Yeah.
kind of a
dual
1-2 punch from Ron
There
Bryant.
you go.
Okay, so on to the opinion section, and Mark Sappenfield has an op-ed entitled "Climate Change and Common Sense Politics."
Yes, what he's saying basically is that he's the editor of the Christian Science Monitor, by the way, and he is talking about the need for compromise, and that if people look commonsensically at solving problems, that it becomes easier, and that sometimes it's better to listen to the other side, for all sides to listen to each other more and try to come to the middle. Nothing really unique in that point of view, but he does apply it to the common sense. Nothing really unique in that point of view, of course, but he does apply it to the climate change discussion.
Okay. Staying with opinions, we move on to what I've come to think of as the counterpoint page. Whenever I read it, and you've got Jason Ballyback on tax reform, which we mentioned earlier, and Jim Waters on public schools site-based councils.
That's right. Jason talks about Kentucky's need for revenue and in any tax reform policy, and he cautions against creating regressive taxes that could harm the poor people in our state. And Jim Waters is critical of the site-based decision-making councils, which were put in place in Kentucky as part of the KERA law, the Kentucky Education Reform Act in the 1980s. And he basically says that those councils strip the Board of Education of their power to deal with personnel and people at schools.
I spoke with Jim earlier in the week, and I think we're going to have him on sometime in the next few weeks on the podcast as well. But
great.
If it does look like we're having a special session, we might want to see if we can get Jim and Jason on together. I think that would be an interesting discussion.
Yes, it would.
Okay.
We won't have to do anything. We can just let them talk.
Here, guys, go for it. Okay, so on to Diane Mulcahy and a piece on page 8 about what traditional companies can learn from the gig economy.
That's right. The gig economy, I guess everyone knows what it is, but basically a lot of people nowadays are self-employed, and they pick up a little bit of work here and a little bit there. And what her point is that managers in traditional companies should let employees have more freedom to be creative and work on their own time, that the work should be project-based instead of clock-based.
Okay. And we'll move back to notes and quotes again. For Morning Consult, they have a report out that has compiled the approval ratings of every United States senator, and Kentucky's senators had their ratings are a little noteworthy.
That's right. So Morning Consult is a media company, and they do polling, and they polled 85,000 people nationwide to get their take on their own senators and governors as well. And Senator McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, is the least popular of all 100 senators. He's the only one who was underwater, so to speak, with his disapproval rate higher than his approval rate. And both of those were, I think his approval rate was 39%.
Something like that.
I forget off the top of my head, but it's in the Gazette.
Yeah,
and Rand Paul did a little bit better. I think he had 50%.
I think it's important to note, though, that, just because approval rating is good or bad doesn't necessarily translate into something on election day. I've seen, public polling and private polling on Senator McConnell going back 15 years, and his approval rating is never high, but it doesn't seem to stop him from getting reelected.
That's true. And approval, actually, I just looked here. He had 44% of the respondents said they approve, and 47% said they disapprove. That's true. Your point's certainly valid, but I think because he's in the public eye so much as majority leader, he's going to take more fire. And that's just
Senator
natural.
Paul has chosen to have a very strong national profile with running for president, and so that also makes him more controversial.
Yes, but his approval rating was 53%.
So, okay,
That's right.
So we've got the Capitol Avenue feature, and it looks like there's been some moving around over at the Kentucky Distillers Association.
Yeah, they hired 3 new people, and we have a little bit on them in the Gazette.
And the Capitol Avenue, of course, is what that is a feature that the Gazette does.
Yeah, it's a regular column. We focus on lobbyists and lobbying. And then some other people moved around too. Michael Higdon, who's a former chief of staff for Hal Rogers in Washington, started his own lobby shop. It's called A1.9.9. It's a reference to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9.
So check out the Gazette and learn
Yes.
more about those folks and some other. Also in this issue, general fund numbers.
Ron and Rand Paul.
Academic diversity statements.
And just for laughs.
Now on to listener questions. This one comes from George in Frankfurt. I saw that a local candidate has filed for re-election already. I thought they couldn't start filing until November. Do you want to take this or you want me to do it?
You take this one.
Okay. What I'm pretty sure has happened is the individual has filed with the Kentucky Registry of Election Finance. So, yes, they have not filed with the county clerk or the Secretary of State's office to be on the ballot. But what a candidate can do is they can write a letter to the Kentucky Registry of Election Finance and say, I intend to run for the following office. I am going to raise less or more than $3,000 because that depends on what kind of reporting they're going to have to do. And I'm going to start doing that right away. And they go ahead and then they can get their bank account and they can start raising money to get ready for a future race.
That's right. There is a distinction there. They call it future year candidacy at the registry.
And it's not unusual for a state reps candidate to file that letter, within months of winning, just so that they can carry whatever money they've got left over to the next campaign and start raising money. And I can tell you from personal experience, it is very time consuming to run a campaign. So if you can spread it out over 18 months or 2 years as opposed to having to do it all in 10 months, it's a little bit easier on the candidate, the family, the campaign, the whole 9 yards. So,
and I think when the public hears that someone has filed for re-election, they're not clear on that. They automatically think it's filing for the ballot. But you're right, that can't happen until after the general election.
Right, or in this case, I think it's the 7th of December since we don't have a general election this year. But yeah. Okay, so that is listener questions for this week. If you'd like to ask a question, you can submit a question by emailing me at leo@kentuckygazette.com. You can also go to the website, www.kentuckygazette.com, and use the Contact Us form, or you can call, and I'm waiting for somebody to do this because I think it would be cool to actually play their question on air. So somebody out there think of a question and call us at 502-783-6407 and just leave your question as a voicemail. And if you do that and you don't want to be played on the air, just say it and we won't. But if you leave it and you don't say that, we're going to play your question on the air. So I just think that would be fun.
Well, and I have a question, Leo.
Sure.
Who is it who filed with the registry already?
I believe at least Rick Rogers, who is the Franklin County jailer. So
little news there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
is okay. Good. I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
So as Leo said, each episode will answer one question. If we don't know the answer, we'll get an answer from the expert in the field.
If you'd like to read more about the stories we discussed today, you can read the full articles and the rest of the Kentucky Gazette by subscribing. It's easy to subscribe. Just go to www.kentuckygazette.com/subscribe.
And if you haven't visited our website in a while, check it out, www.kentuckygazette.com. We post breaking news and information that doesn't always make it into the print edition of the paper.
Stay up to date on what's going on in Frankfurt and D.C. in between podcast and issues of the Gazette. You can follow us on Twitter at Kentucky Gazette or on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Kentucky Gazette. I think there's a theme building up here.
That's
Kentucky
right.
Gazette.
They're going to be tired of hearing that, Leo. So we'll just say you can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher Radio and YouTube.
That's right.
Which is different than www.kentuckygazette.
That's right.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a good review.
And coming soon to Google Play Music.
That will do it for this episode of the Kentucky Gazette podcast. Thanks for listening.
The Kentucky Gazette podcast is a production of the Kentucky Gazette. Copyright 2017, Gravel Switch Publishing. The podcast is produced in the studios of TCHQ Communications in Frankfort, Kentucky. Thank you for listening.